I watched Henderson's breath smoke out in the lantern light, though the night about us lay utterly still. No wind moved, yet the mule bells below had fallen silent mid-step. Snow creaked under a weight that was not ours, circling just beyond the ring of flame. Then I saw its impression forming in the drift beside my boot, an immense hound's track, pressed deep, with no paw, no leg, no body above it. Men have pressed me for this account in clubs and survey offices, and I confess I offer it now with some reluctance. If you would hear more of such journeys, mark your interest, lend your name, and set down your thoughts as a comment, so that I may know which paths you would have chosen and which you would have wisely refused. To understand what paced us upon that ridge, I must return to the spring of 1893, when the United States Geological Survey engaged me for a season in the higher Sierra Nevada. I was then 30 years of age, a civil engineer by training, convinced that the last shadows upon the maps could be driven back by compass, aneroid barometer, and patient triangulation. We assembled at Carson City in late May. Myself, Captain Edward Henderson, a former Army officer turned surveyor young Thomas Avery, our chainman and draftsman, and Miguel Ortega, a California muleteer who knew the eastern approaches of the Sierra as other men know their own gardens. Our purpose was plain: to chart a more direct pass between the Walker River country and the western valleys, a line that might one day carry a road or even a spur of the iron rails. Our equipment was typical for the period, if somewhat worn. We had 2 transit theodolites, brass and glass polished to a dull glow, 3 aneroid barometers, a sextant for occasional checks, prismatic compasses, field books bound in oilcloth, 4 Winchester rifles and 2 Colt revolvers, canvas tents, and a small library of existing topographical sheets. Henderson insisted on a box of signal flares, relics of his army days, and I brought a folding camera with glass plates, more from vanity than necessity. We left Carson City on the 2nd of June, following the rough wagon road south toward the Walker River, then turned west into country that was, on the maps of the time, little more than a wash of contour lines and conjecture. The snow line still lay low that year. Winter had clung to the high country with unusual tenacity. Miguel warned that the passes might yet be choked. On the 5th evening, as we camped beside a cold, clear stream that rushed down from unseen snowfields, I shared tobacco with Avery, while Henderson studied the stars for a rough latitude. The fire burned low, and the wind carried the scent of pine and distant thaw. "Will you remain with the survey after this season?" I asked Avery. He was 22, with ink-stained fingers and an eager, open face. He smiled into the fire. "If they will have me, sir, though my mother believes I shall vanish into these hills and never be heard from again. She still speaks of the Donner Party as if they had passed only yesterday." "You may tell her," Henderson interjected dryly, "that we carry sufficient stores and that I have no intention of eating a draftsman, however stringy." Miguel chuckled at that, and for a moment the wilderness seemed almost companionable. Avery spoke then of San Francisco, of a sister engaged to a clerk in the Southern Pacific offices, of his hope to one day see his name printed on a published map. I remember the way his eyes shone at the thought. It is a small thing, but I have returned to that fire in memory more often than to any other. The first anomaly came 3 days later, and at the time, I scarcely marked it. We had climbed to a broad forested bench where the pines grew close, their trunks black with old fire scars. Snow lay in long, dirty ribbons between them. The air had a peculiar stillness, as if the usual mountain sounds, the chatter of jays, the ticking of insects, had been muffled. Miguel halted the lead mule and raised a hand. "Do you hear?" he asked. I listened. There was wind high in the branches and the distant rush of meltwater, but nothing else. "Hear what?" Henderson said. "That is it," Miguel replied. "The jays. Always they speak. Here, nothing." I remarked that perhaps a hawk or owl had passed recently, and he shrugged, unconvinced. We moved on. Had I understood the warning in that absence, I might have urged a different course. That night, our camp lay upon the edge of a shallow basin, ringed by dark trees. Snow still covered much of the ground, crusted and pitted. The stars shone hard and cold, and the temperature fell sharply after sundown. We had tethered the mules in a small stand of furs and retired early, for the day's climb had been severe. Sometime past midnight, I woke with the clear, sharp consciousness that often precedes a storm. The canvas above my face glowed faintly from starlight, and the air in the tent felt thin and brittle. Then I realized what had roused me. The mules, which had been jangling their bells fitfully when I lay down, were utterly silent. There came a sound then from the basin, faint but distinct, a slow, deliberate crunching in the snow, as of a single heavy creature moving with care. It circled once, twice, just beyond the perimeter of our camp. I heard Henderson shift in his blankets. "Probably a deer," I whispered. "Deer do not move like that," he murmured back. His hand rested on the Winchester beside him. We lay listening until the sound ceased. No animal cried, no twigs snapped. After some minutes, Henderson loosed a breath and muttered that it was nothing, that cold and fatigue made one's ears play tricks. I accepted this at the time. In the morning, however, I found tracks. They crossed the basin in a great arc, passing within 30 yards of our tents. At first glance, I took them for the prints of a large dog or wolf, each one deep and clean in the crusted snow. Yet their spacing was wrong. Too wide for any natural gait, I knew, each step set down with a curious precision, almost as if the creature had tested the snow before committing its weight. "Big coyote," Avery said, squinting at them. "Or perhaps a dog from some mining camp." "There is no camp within 30 miles, Miguel replied. He knelt and traced the edge of one print with a gloved finger. "See how sharp the outline is. No melt, no crumble. It walked here not long before dawn." I measured one of the impressions with my field rule. It was nearly 7 inches across, with 4 distinct toe marks and a heavy pad, yet I could not see the faint claw points one would expect in a wolf. I sketched it in my notebook, noting the date, June 11th, 1893. Then, because there was work to be done and miles to cover, I closed the book and thought of it no more. In the days that followed, the country grew harsher. We ascended above the tree line onto long, broken ridges of granite, the snow lying in deep drifts wherever the wind had not scoured it away. Clouds moved swiftly, casting the world alternately in harsh glare and flat shadow. We advanced by dead reckoning and sighting upon distant peaks, taking bearings, measuring angles, and recording elevations until numbers danced before my eyes at night. Other small oddities accumulated. Once, when we paused upon a saddle between 2 peaks, I heard what I took to be a distant barking, carried thinly on the wind from some unseen sheep camp. Yet when I raised the glass, no smoke, no tent, no animal could be seen in any direction, only the white slopes and dark stone. Another time, we found a hare, or what remained of one, upon the snow. It had been torn open, yet there was remarkably little blood about, as if something had fed with fastidious care. The tracks that led to and from the carcass were those of a large canine, but they began and ended within a few yards, as though the creature had stepped down out of the air and then departed in like fashion. I proposed that drifting snow had obscured the approach and retreat. Miguel said nothing, but he crossed himself. By the third week, even Henderson's habitual composure had begun to fray. We had chosen to press toward a high, unnamed pass that he believed might offer a more direct line than the established routes. The weather held fair, but the snow lay deeper than was comfortable, and our progress slowed. The mules grew skittish, shying at shadows and refusing, at times, to advance until Miguel spoke to them in low, urgent Spanish. On the evening of June 21st, we camped upon a narrow ledge above a steep, forested valley. The sun had set in a smear of crimson over the western ranges, and a thin mist had risen from the trees below, pooling like smoke. We built our fire close to the rock wall for shelter and ate in a subdued fashion, each man occupied with his own thoughts. It was then that Avery, who had been uncharacteristically quiet all day, spoke. "Do you recall, sir," he said to me, "the story Mr. King told at the survey office of the creature the Washos speak of in these mountains?" I frowned, trying to recall. Clarence King, the first chief of the survey, was a man given to vivid tales, and I had heard many of them. He spoke, Avery continued, of a hound that made no sound, a great dog of the high snows that hunted men who travelled alone. I laughed at it then. I do not find it amusing now. Henderson snorted. Every range has its bogey. In the Alps, they speak of dragons. In the Rockies, of wild men. The Washoe are no different. They give a name to avalanche and misstep, that is all. Miguel stared into the mist below. "The Washoe do not speak lightly of that which walks here," he said softly. "They say it comes when the world is quiet, that it makes no sound until it is at your side." "Then we shall keep our rifles close," Henderson replied, with a forced joviality that convinced no one. "And if we meet this phantom dog, we shall measure it, weigh it, and mount its head upon the wall of the survey office." We laughed, because men must laugh at such moments, or else acknowledge their unease. Yet that night, each of us, I think, listened longer than usual before sleep took us. 2 days later, the mountain itself seemed to betray us. We had begun the ascent of the unnamed pass, the snow lying in a broad, shallow couloir between walls of dark rock. The sky was overcast, the light flat and without warmth. We moved roped together, more from Henderson's insistence than from any clear necessity, for the snow appeared stable. At mid-morning, as I paused to take a barometric reading, there came a sudden sharp crack from above, followed by a low, rushing roar. An overhanging cornice had given way. We saw it only for a moment, a white slab breaking free, tumbling, shattering, before the slope beneath our feet began to move. "Run for the rocks!" Henderson shouted. We stumbled, half ran, half slid toward the nearest outcrop, the snow rippling and buckling like a great, slow wave. The mules screamed. For an instant, I lost my footing and felt the entire slope drop under me. Then the rope went taut as Henderson and Miguel braced themselves, and I clawed my way to the shelter of the rocks. The avalanche passed below us, a grinding, hissing mass that tore small trees from the slope, buried boulders, and vanished into the valley with a distant thunder. When at last the air cleared, we found that one of the pack mules had been carried away, along with a crate of provisions and, to my dismay, the box that contained my glass plates. We spent an hour in strained silence, recovering what we could from the disturbed snow. No man spoke of how near we had come to being taken with the mule. It was then, as we stood amidst the churned white and splintered branches, that the midday quiet was broken by a sound that even now I cannot fully describe. It began as a low, hollow note, like wind in a chimney, but there was no wind. It rose, slowly, to a pitch that set my teeth on edge, then cut off at once, as if a door had been closed upon it. The sound came from the ridge above us, from beyond a fold of snow and rock we could not see. The mules went mad. Those that remained threw themselves against their tethers, eyes rolling, foam at their bits. One fell and thrashed upon the snow. Miguel swore and struggled to calm them, but his voice was lost in their panic. "What was that?" Avery whispered. His face had gone quite pale. "Pressure in the snow," I said, though I knew it was no such thing. "Some air pocket collapsing. Nothing more." Henderson stared up at the ridge, his jaw tight. "We move," he said. "Now. I will not linger here." As we climbed, I glanced back once. Upon the untouched snow of the ridge above, just visible against the grey sky, I thought I saw a line of impressions, spaced widely apart, as if some large animal had walked there. Yet the distance, the light, and the agitation of the moment made certainty impossible. When I looked again, the ridge was blank. From that day, our rational explanations grew thinner, and our tempers with them. The work, which had once occupied our minds to the exclusion of all else, now seemed a fragile screen between us and some presence that watched from just beyond the range of sight. At night, we heard, more than once, the slow, deliberate crunch of unseen feet upon snow circling the camp. Once, something brushed against the taut line of the tent where I lay, so close that the canvas bowed inward toward my face, though no form was visible in the dimness. Avery, who had begun the expedition with such enthusiasm, now jumped at small sounds and started awake from troubled dreams. Miguel grew taciturn, murmuring brief prayers in Spanish when he thought no one watched. Henderson became brusque, almost harsh, pressing us to keep to the schedule he had set, as if the numbers in his field book could shield us. On the night of June 27th, the silence itself took on a weight. We had made camp upon a high shoulder of the range, with a sheer drop falling away on one side and a slope of broken rock on the other. The sky was clear, the stars so numerous that the darkness between them seemed scarcely able to contain them. The air was intensely cold, yet utterly still. Our fire burned with a steady, unwavering flame. It was then that the world seemed to pause. The faint crackle of the fire, the soft jangle of a mule's bell, even the whisper of our own breath, all fell away at once. My ears rang with the absence. The hairs upon my arms and neck rose, though I felt no breeze. "Do you feel that?" Avery said hoarsely. Before I could answer, a shape moved at the very edge of the firelight, low and swift, a darker shadow against the dark. It passed between two rocks, no more than 20 feet from where we sat, and was gone. No sound accompanied it. The mules, which had been dozing, froze, heads high, nostrils flared, but made no noise. I snatched up my rifle. "Who goes there?" I called, my voice too loud in the strange stillness. There was no reply. The silence pressed closer, like water. Then, as suddenly as it had descended, it broke. The fire crackled again. The mules snorted and stamped. A distant owl called from the valley. My heart hammered as if I had run a great distance. "You saw it," Avery said. "You saw it." "I saw something," I replied. The words tasted thin. Henderson's face was set like stone. "From now on," he said, "we keep watch in pairs. 2 hours on, 2 off. No man is to be alone outside the tents." No one argued. The next days passed in a kind of strained routine. We worked, we climbed, we measured, but always with the sense that something moved parallel to us, just beyond the next ridge or stand of trees. We found more tracks, always in the mornings, great dog-like impressions upon the snow, sometimes circling the camp, sometimes crossing our own trail and vanishing into bare rock where no living creature could have left so clear a mark. Once, in a narrow defile where the snow lay deep and blue in shadow, we came upon a set of such prints that began halfway down the slope, as if the animal had dropped there from a considerable height. I tested the snow with my staff around the first print and found no disturbance, no sign of any other approach. The prints led down the defile and out of sight around a bend. "We should follow," Henderson said, his eyes hard. "With respect, Captain," Miguel replied quietly, "we have seen enough." In the end, prudence or fear prevailed. We noted the direction of the tracks, sketched them, and continued upon our planned course. Yet I felt, as we walked away, that we were turning our backs upon something that had taken an interest in us. It was in the first days of July that the matter came to its dreadful head. We had reached the highest point of our intended route, a broad, wind-scoured saddle between 2 nameless peaks, from which the land fell away in long, snow-filled valleys to east and west. We spent the day establishing a primary triangulation station, setting our theodolites upon solid rock and taking careful angles to distant summits. The work absorbed us for a time, and I almost forgot the sense of being observed. By late afternoon, the air had grown heavy, though no clouds had yet formed. A peculiar hush lay upon the saddle, as if the very sky held its breath. We decided to camp just below the crest, on a small shelf where the snow had melted back from the stone, leaving a patch of bare ground. From there we could see, in the failing light, the long line of our intended descent. We ate little that evening. Each man seemed sunk in his own thoughts. I recall the taste of the beans, metallic and flat, and the smell of the coffee, strong but somehow thin in the high air. The mules clustered together, heads low, their breath steaming in the cold. Henderson assigned the watches. He and I first, then Miguel and Avery. The stars came out hard and bright. A faint wind rose, carrying with it a smell I could not at first place. Not pine, not snow, but a dry, musky odor like old fur and stone. "Do you smell that?" I asked Henderson. He nodded once, his jaw tight. "Keep your rifle ready," he said. The hours passed. The wind dropped. The smell lingered. At some point, perhaps near midnight, I became aware of a subtle change in the quality of the darkness beyond the fire. It seemed thicker, more absolute, as if the world beyond our small circle of light had been erased. Then, without warning, the mule's bells ceased. Not a jingle, not a snort, not a shifting hoof. The silence that followed was so complete that I heard the small click of my own eyelids as I blinked. Something moved at the edge of the firelight. Not a shape this time, but a distortion, a suggestion of mass that swallowed the glow rather than reflecting it. The hairs along my arms rose. My mouth went dry. "Henderson," I whispered. "Do you see?" He did. I felt him stiffen beside me. "Do not fire," he said softly. "Not yet." The thing stepped forward then, just enough that the light caught it. I have struggled for years to describe what I saw in terms that do not betray either my reason or my memory. It stood perhaps the height of a man at the shoulder, its body long and low like that of a hound, but more massive, as if wrought of denser stuff than flesh. Its coat, if such it was, absorbed the light, a black so deep that it seemed to drink the fire's glow. Its head was broad, with ears laid back, and its eyes were the worst of it. They held no reflection, no glimmer, only a dull, lightless depth, like wells cut into night. It made no sound. Its paws, great and heavy, pressed into the earth with such deliberation that I fancied I could hear the faint crackle of individual grains of soil beneath them. Yet there was no corresponding jingle of tack, no snort, no breath. It was as if the mountain itself had taken on the semblance of a beast and come to regard us. It moved its head slowly from side to side, sniffing, though the air did not stir. Its gaze passed over me, over Henderson, and came to rest upon the tents where Miguel and Avery slept. Only then did I find my voice. "Avery!" I shouted. "Wake!" The beast, if I may call it that, flinched, not in surprise, but almost in irritation as one might at a fly. It took a single step toward the tents. Henderson raised his rifle. "Do not—" I began, but the shot cracked out, shattering the silence. The bullet struck the creature's shoulder. I saw the impact, saw a small puff of something. Snow, dust, rise from its hide. For an instant it seemed to blur, as if its outline had been disturbed. Then it turned its head toward Henderson with a motion so slow and deliberate that my bowels turned to water. There was no snarl, no roar. Its jaws parted slightly, and from the darkness of its throat came that same hollow note we had heard upon the avalanche slope, now much nearer. It rose, not in volume, but in intensity, until my teeth ached and my vision swam. The fire guttered low, as if pressed upon by a great weight. The tent flap burst open. Avery stumbled out, half-dressed, eyes wild. "What is—" he began. The beast moved. It did not leap. It did not spring. It simply was, at one moment, by the fire, and at the next, between Avery and the rest of us, as if the intervening space had been folded. There was a rush of cold so profound that the breath was driven from my lungs. I saw Avery's hand reach out, fingers spread, as if to ward it off. His palm passed through the creature's shoulder up to the wrist, as though into deep water. His expression in that instant was not of pain, but of astonishment. Then the cold struck me full, and the world narrowed to a point. When my senses returned, I found myself on my knees in the snow, the rifle fallen from my hands. The fire had nearly gone out, reduced to a few dull embers. The mules were screaming, their voices at last released and straining at their tethers. Henderson crouched beside me, his face ashen. "Avery," I gasped. "Where is Avery?" There was no sign of him. His bedroll lay half unrolled within the tent. His boots stood by the entrance. The snow around the camp was unmarked save for our own frantic tracks, and, leading away from the spot where he had stood, a single line of immense hound's prints, each one pressed deep and sharp into the crust, marching out into the darkness and up the bare rock of the saddle, where no snow lay to record them further. Miguel emerged from the other tent, crossing himself repeatedly. "Madre de Dios," he whispered. "He is gone." "We must follow," I said, staggering to my feet. Henderson seized my arm. "We will not find him in that," he said, nodding toward the blackness beyond the fire. "At first light, we search. Not before." His words were reasonable, but reason had little hold upon me then. I tore my arm free. "You saw what it did," I said. "You would leave him to that. What would you have me do?" he snapped. "Lead us all into that dark to vanish as he did? We will wait for day." In the end, exhausted, half frozen, and with the mules on the brink of breaking free entirely, we did as he said. No man slept. We sat with our rifles in our hands, watching the edge of the firelight, listening for the slow crunch of unseen feet that never came. At dawn, we searched. We followed the line of tracks as far as the saddle, where they climbed onto bare stone and simply ceased. We called Avery's name until our voices were hoarse. No echo answered. No scrap of clothing, no drop of blood, no sign of struggle could be found. It was as if he had stepped into the beast and been borne away within it. By noon, the sky had clouded over, and a fine, dry snow began to fall. Henderson stood upon the saddle, staring westward, his field book forgotten in his hand. "We are done here," he said at last. We go down. There was no argument. We broke camp in a silence broken only by the clink of metal and the occasional involuntary mutter of prayer. We left Avery's boots where they stood by the tent, for none of us could bring himself to touch them. The descent that followed remains in my memory, a blur of white and grey and the rasp of laboured breath. The mountains that had seemed on our ascent grand and indifferent now felt close and watchful. Every hollow, every stand of twisted krumholz seemed a place where something might be waiting, utterly still. We spoke little. When we did, it was of practical matters: the best line down a slope, the state of the mules, the remaining provisions. No one mentioned Avery's name. His absence walked with us like a fifth man. More than once, in the days that followed, I heard, from somewhere behind or above us, that faint, deliberate crunching in the snow, as of a great hound pacing our trail. Each time I turned, rifle raised, there was nothing to be seen, only our own tracks and the unmarked drifts. Once, near dusk, Miguel pointed to a distant ridge and said, "There." I followed his gaze and thought for a heartbeat that I saw a dark shape standing against the sky, motionless. Then a veil of snow passed, and it was gone. The mules, perhaps, suffered most. One refused entirely to cross a certain shallow hollow where the snow lay oddly smooth, planting its feet and trembling until we led it around at some cost of time and effort. Another, in the night, tore free of its tether and bolted downslope, its bell clanging wildly until the sound ended in a distant, dull crash. We found it the next day at the base of a small cliff, neck broken. Around its body, in the new snow, we saw the prints, a slow, circling path, as if something had walked about the fallen animal, considering. When at last we dropped below the snow line and into the dark belt of pines, the sense of being observed lessened, but did not entirely depart. The undergrowth was thick, the air heavy with the scent of sap and damp earth. At night, the usual forest sounds returned, the chirp of insects, the rustle of small creatures, but threaded through them now and then came that hollow note, distant and low, that set our teeth on edge. On the 10th of July, we regained the rough wagon track along the Walker River. A prospector's cabin stood there, smoke rising from its chimney. The man who lived within came out to stare at us as we approached. 3 gaunt, hollow-eyed figures leading a reduced string of mules. "You have lost a man," he said at once. "I can see it." Henderson only nodded. We took water from his well and pressed on. For the presence of another human being, far from comforting, seemed almost intrusive, as if we carried with us something that did not care to be observed. In Carson City, the survey office received us with a mixture of relief and irritation. We were late, our instruments battered, our notes smeared by snow and damp. When asked after Avery, Henderson replied in a flat tone that he had been lost in a snowslide near the crest. The clerk who recorded our return pursed his lips and made a note in the ledger. 1 casualty, avalanche. That evening, in a small, smoke-filled room at the back of the office, we 3 survivors sat with the district chief, a spare man named Wilcox, to give our official report. The maps we had sketched were spread upon the table, weighted at the corners with inkwells. Outside, the clatter of wagons and the shouts of teamsters drifted in through the window. "Begin at the Walker," Wilcox said. "Proceed in order. Distances, bearings, elevations. We will leave the matter of Mr. Avery's death to the end." We did as he asked. For an hour, perhaps more, we spoke of ridges and saddles, of slopes and drainage, of rock types and timberlines. My voice steadied as I recited the familiar litany of survey. Numbers, at least, retained their integrity. When at last we came, inevitably, to the high saddle and the night of Avery's disappearance, there was a pause. Wilcox dipped his pen, poised it over the paper. "Very well," he said. "Describe the avalanche." "There was no avalanche," I replied, before I could stop myself. Wilcox looked up sharply. "You wrote here," he tapped Henderson's preliminary note, "that Mr. Avery was lost in a slide." "That was my suggestion," Henderson said, his gaze fixed upon the table. It seemed the most plausible account. "Then what occurred?" Wilcox asked. His tone was patient, but there was a faint edge to it. I looked at Henderson, at Miguel. Neither man met my eye. The room felt suddenly very small. "We were attacked," I said at last. The word sounded absurd, even to my own ears, by some creature. A great hound, though not like any dog I have seen. It made no sound as it moved. It left tracks where no tracks should have been. It took him. Wilcox's pen did not move. "A hound," he repeated. "A mountain lion, perhaps," I amended quickly. "Or a wolf." It was dark. There was confusion. "Wolves do not walk without sound," Miguel said quietly. "Pumas do not swallow men without blood." "Enough," Henderson snapped. We were exhausted. The light was poor. Mr. Avery stepped too near the edge. The snow gave way. In the moment, it may have seemed otherwise, but that is the truth of it. "Is it?" Wilcox asked. His eyes, grey and tired, flicked between us. In the end, the official account read thus: that Thomas Avery, draftsman, had been lost in a small snowslide near the crest of an unnamed saddle, his body unrecoverable due to the unstable conditions. No mention was made of tracks that began and ended in mid-slope, of nights when the world fell silent, of a beast whose hide drank the firelight. To have set such things down in a government report would have been to invite ridicule at best, censure at worst. I signed my name to that report. So did Henderson and Miguel. Our signatures lay there in neat ink beneath a version of events we knew, in our hearts, to be incomplete at best, false at worst. In the years that followed, I sought, in my own way, to reconcile what we had seen with the world as I understood it. I read accounts of wolves and mountain lions, of bears and feral dogs. None matched the thing that had stood at the edge of our fire. I spoke discreetly with trappers and native guides. A Washoe elder, when I described, in careful, indirect terms, a silent hound of the high snows, only shook his head and said, "You went where we do not go. You heard what we do not name. Be glad you came back." Once, in the winter of 1897, I sat in a San Francisco parlor, the gaslight soft upon the wallpaper, and listened as a gentleman geologist recounted, for the amusement of the company, a tale he had heard of a ghost dog in the Sierra. The ladies shivered, the men laughed. I felt my hands grow cold upon the arms of my chair. Later, as the guests departed, he turned to me. "You were with Henderson in the Nevada ranges, were you not? Did you ever hear such nonsense from the locals?" I considered for a moment telling him. Instead, I said, "I heard many tales. Most were nonsense. It was not entirely a lie. I saw Miguel once more, some 10 years after the expedition, in a small cantina near Sacramento. Time had bent him, silvered his hair, but his eyes were the same. We spoke of ordinary things at first, of weather, of wages, of the encroaching rails. At length, our words ran thin, and the silence between us filled with unspoken memory. "Do you ever dream of it?" I asked at last. He looked into his glass. "No," he said, "I do not dream. I wake." After a moment, he added, "Sometimes in the night, when all is quiet, I hear the bells of the mules stop. Then I know I am not there because I am still alive." We parted without mention of seeing one another again. There are some bonds that are strengthened, not by repeated contact, but by the shared reluctance to disturb what lies between. As for Henderson, he continued with the survey for some years, then retired to a small farm in the east. We exchanged letters, at first about work, then about nothing at all. In none of them did he refer to the silent hound. Only once, in a brief note acknowledging the receipt of some maps I had sent, he wrote, in a hand more cramped than usual, "I trust you have not returned to that saddle. I would advise against it." He underlined the last 4 words. That was all. The experience marked me in ways I did not at first recognize. In cities, amid the clatter of wheels and the cries of vendors, I would sometimes be seized by a sudden, irrational dread when the noise dipped, for a heartbeat, into a rare lull. In that instant of near silence, I would feel the hair rise upon my arms, my muscles tense, as if expecting the world to fall away into that absolute, suffocating quiet we had known upon the mountain. Once, in the winter of 1902, I was walking alone along the Embarcadero at dusk when a fog rolled in from the bay, thick and cold. The sounds of the city, horns, voices, the slap of water against hulls, grew muffled. Somewhere in the grey, a dog barked, then fell abruptly silent. The fog pressed close, beading upon my coat. For a moment, I smelled, beneath the salt and cold smoke, a dry, musky odour like old fur and stone. My breath caught. The cobbles under my feet seemed to tilt. Then a cart rattled past, the driver cursing his horse, and the world snapped back into place. I have avoided the High Sierra since that expedition. My work has taken me to other ranges, the Cascades, the Rockies, but never again to that particular saddle between nameless peaks. On maps, it remains an anonymous contour among many, a slight depression in the great spine of the mountains. No road has been driven through it. No trail, so far as I know, bears a name there. From time to time, I have entertained the notion of returning, of bringing with me better instruments, more men, perhaps even one of those new motion picture cameras to capture, once and for all, the thing we glimpsed. Each time, the idea withers when I imagine, too clearly, the firelight, the sudden cessation of sound, the feel of a cold so deep it seemed to pass through flesh and bone into something more essential. There are those who would say that fatigue, altitude, and fear conspired to deceive us, that Avery fell into a crevasse or over a cornice in the confusion of a winter night, that our memories, coloured by guilt and grief, clothed an ordinary tragedy in supernatural garb. I have, on occasion, tried to adopt this view, to soothe my mind with the balm of rational explanation. Yet always, at the last, I return to certain stubborn particulars. The tracks that began and ended in mid-slope, the way the creature's hide drank the firelight, the hollow note that made my teeth ache, the absence, more terrible than any sound, that preceded its arrival. If there is a lesson in what we encountered, I am not certain of its nature. Perhaps it is only this, that there remain, in the interstices of the mapped world, pockets where the old laws hold sway, places where the boundary between what is and what is not yet understood grows thin. Men like myself, with our compasses and chains, our theodolites and barometers, move through such regions believing that by measuring them, we have mastered them. The mountain, indifferent, permits the illusion, until it does not. When I think now of that expedition, it is not the great vistas that return to me, nor the clean lines of ridges against the sky, nor the satisfaction of a well-closed traverse. It is smaller things. The way Avery's eyes shone when he spoke of seeing his name on a map, the tremor in Miguel's hand as he traced the edge of a track in the snow, the way Henderson's jaw tightened when he chose the avalanche as our official truth. And above all, it is the moment when the mule bells ceased, that instant of perfect, unnatural stillness, when the world seemed to hold its breath and the fire's crackle died in its own throat. In quiet rooms, years and miles from that saddle, I have known it again. A sudden, inexplicable pause in the ordinary noise of life, a hush that lasts no more than a heartbeat. In that sliver of silence, I feel, as keenly as I did then, the press of unseen paws upon snow, the weight of a gaze from eyes that hold no light. Somewhere, high among the ridges and boles of the Sierra Nevada, there is, perhaps, a hollow where the snow lies deeper, where the jays fall silent without cause, where the tracks of a great hound appear and vanish upon the wind-scoured stone. Men pass below, in valleys threaded now with rails and roads, their attention fixed upon their own affairs. Above them, in that stillness, something paces, patient and unobserved. When the house is quiet and the city's murmur has sunk to a distant hum, I sometimes find my hand straying to my jaw, feeling, unbidden, the faint ache in my teeth that heralded its cry. Then I listen, not for a sound, but for the sudden absence of all sound, and I remember the firelight on the snow and the way an immense, invisible paw pressed its print into the drift beside my boot.